Hello Bloomers, welcome to Better Future Podcast. The following is a conversation with Jason Crawford. Jason is former tech startup founder and a software engineer at companies like Flexport, Amazon, Groupon, and a few more. He is advising our world in data, but most importantly and recently he's the founder of The Roots of Progress, a nonprofit dedicated to establishing a new philosophy of progress for the 21st century, mainly concerned with history and philosophy of progress, especially in technology and industry. This podcast was recorded at the Vision Weekend, a yearly conference hosted by Foresight Institute that is focusing on envisioning positive long-term futures, which is a perfect fit for the Better Future Podcast because the aim of this podcast is to highlight people imagining, inspiring, and building a better future. I had a great time discussing progress studies, the way history of progress can teach us and improve our understanding of our ability to solve problems, the solutionist mindset, looking for actionable solutions rather than defeatist bickering, and so much more. With that said, enjoy the conversation. One of the things that I know you are interested in progress and progress studies, and that's kind of taking the lens and looking at the history mostly, and then projecting into the future. But since we are at the Foresight Vision Weekend today, what does the word or foresight mean to you, or how would you what do you think is the connection between progress studies and looking at the past and then foresighting in the future? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Ultimately, the reason to study history is to understand the present and to shape the future. History can be fascinating in and of itself, but the reason why I think the study of it is justified and is deeply important to us is not just for its own sake, but to better understand the world. So that's what I'm doing. The reason why I called my project The Roots of Progress is because I wanted to ultimately understand what are the root causes. Mm-hmm. And while I say I wouldn't say I've quite, I don't yet have a grand unified theory of progress. It's been fascinating just to learn the history of it. I think the history of progress is not well known or appreciated, at least in the broader community. I'm sure folks in the Foresight community and the folks who think long term about the future are probably well aware of it. But part of my goal is just to spread awareness and appreciation of just how far we've come.
Totally makes sense. And I think it really connects well together with Foresight because to foresight well, you need to be able to also look at the past and the trends correctly and be aware of them. What did you, at this current Vision Weekend, you said that is your first one. What was a conversation maybe that was the most memorable, or what was a session that struck off with you the most? What is do you have a highlight so far that you would point out?
Oh, let's see. A lot of really interesting technologies were discussed yesterday. Longevity is really exciting, and I'm glad to see a lot of work going on there. For some reason, I have a special place in my heart now for the molecular technology and the molecular machines, atomically precise manufacturing. That stuff is just amazing in its potential. So I'm glad there's also work going on there.
Yep, similar. Longevity is my interest and also kind of work, but there seems to be a lot of potential and growing trend of the molecular machines.
And those two might have a lot to do with each other in the long term. We'll see.
Yeah. What do you enjoy the most about the Foresight community? Because for me, at least, it's kind of a battery charger, since you meet a lot of people who are actually optimistic, and care about the future and are actually trying to do something. With as you called it one time, solutionistic, trying to build solutions rather than just dream about things. So, what do you enjoy the most about the community here?
One thing I really love is that the vision of the future that this community has is a very ambitious vision of the future, right? So I think a lot of people in the broader world, even if they have an optimistic vision of the future, they have a very humble or modest sort of view of what that future might be. Maybe they think about things like stop climate change or cure disease or end poverty. And the folks here are thinking about terraforming planets and colonizing space and creating immortality and creating nanotech, and so it is going way beyond where the current technologies are, which on the one hand may seem like science fiction. On the other hand, science fiction has come true many times in the past, and to think that we're done with that, to think that the future can't be just as amazing compared to the present as truly the present is compared to the past, I think is actually missing the big picture of history.
No, I agree. It seems to be coming back. A lot of people, at least, are coming back to that statement like history is over, but it's not, right? We are still progressing, and even like rapidly more. So it definitely makes sense to think long term, try to shoot for the moon. One of the themes of Foresight is also this kind of existential hope thing. That's trying to actually build a better future and because not be optimistic about it, but try to and be the opposite of existential dread and just being in despair and saying that everything is bad. And of course there are big problems, but you're trying to actually build something, so there needs to be some motivation for that. So I guess you're on the same boat in that direction. So in more like personal question, what gives you personally existential hope? Like what motivates you, or like what gives the motivation to your work and to your life?
I love the existential hope concept. I've been thinking a lot about optimism and pessimism. There's those terms can actually be confusing, and I think sometimes people end up talking at cross purposes about optimism and pessimism and which one to be. On the one hand, you could optimism or pessimism can be like a prediction for the future. It can be a question of like, are we on the right track? Is the future bright? Are things going to be? Are our problems, the problems we're facing, are they going to be easy to solve or hard to solve? But I actually think that's not the important, not the really important discussion. Nor is it the one that I think we should align ourselves with one side or the other, right? Because the question of whether the future is bright is a very contingent one. But there's a deeper kind of issue that sometimes goes by optimism or pessimism, but I've really started to think of as it's much more about agency. Is the future up to us? Can we shape the future? And so whether we think the problems are easy or hard to solve, whether the future looks bright or dark, are we going to step up and do our best, bring our best efforts, our enthusiasm, our energy to working for the brightest possible future? And so, that's what I really want to stress is that concept of agency and of shaping the future. Ultimately, the future is up to us. So, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic, just don't be fatalistic, don't be defeatist, right? Let's be solutionists and let's work towards a better future.
Can you trace back how did that mindset develop, like for yourself? Do you have was there a specific like book, or did you come to it through some like rational, process, or was it more like experiential? Sometime that you had a perspective shift, and then suddenly you said like, wow, we can actually do something about it.
It's been so long for me. I can't even remember when the first time that concept, came to my mind. But certainly some things I've read more, in recent years have influenced me. And on this particular point, perhaps one of the best is David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity, which talks very much about the concept of progress. And he says that, anything that is not forbidden by the laws of physics is possible given the right knowledge. And that even though problems are inevitable, we'll never have solved the last problem. All problems are solvable, again, given the right knowledge. So
that's a good solutionist point of view. One of the things or people that influenced me quite a bit is Peter Diamandis, and he's also talking a bit about progress, but mostly in the futuristic, I guess, sense of more looking to the future more than to the past that much. But still, he has this great concept of massive transformative purpose. Have you formulated something like that for you, or is that more in line with the Roots of Progress and the mission of Roots of Progress, and that's basically your manifestation of that vision or mission?
Yeah, I would say, the mission of the Roots of Progress is my mission right now, and that is to establish a new philosophy of progress for the 21st century. I think if you look back at the 19th century, for instance, especially the late 19th century, there was a very strong positive philosophy of progress. People really believed in the power of technology to make the world better, and they saw that happening all around them. And then, something really changed in the 20th century, especially in the generation after the World Wars. We saw a shift in perspectives and attitudes, really a rise in fear and distrust and skepticism of the very idea of whether progress was possible and whether progress in science and technology was even a desirable thing. And so, but I don't think that has led to a better world. I don't think that has led to solutions to the problems facing the world. And so I think we need a new way forward. We need something that is not so naive, perhaps, as the 19th century view, which perhaps was blind to the risks and problems of progress, but also not so fatalistic and defeatist as the view that arose in the mid to late 20th century. We need really a combination of that agency, that belief in our own agency, combined with a very clear-eyed view of the risks and problems. So that's the new philosophy of progress for the 21st century that I'm working to establish.
That's awesome. I resonate with that a lot because, at least in my vicinity, I'm from Czech Republic, and there are a lot of people, and even on the internet, on the younger generations, a lot of them are actually becoming more and more fatalistic over time. It seems to me, at least, and so. Definitely something that would counter that would be awesome. Do you have a sense of how that actually began? What was the shift from the...
Yeah, my hypothesis is that the big transformative event really was the World Wars. And part of this is because if you look at how people were talking about progress in just before the wars, in the decades leading up to them, people were very optimistic about the progress of not only technology, but of morality and society. And they thought that those things went hand in hand and were going together. And some people even saw progress in all dimensions as more or less inevitable. And they were looking forward to utopia. They saw in particular, many things were going right in that era. So, the last century or two before the World Wars had seen the fall of monarchy in many places. Democracy was on the rise. Slavery had been ended in the West. And so here, you look at those things and you look around at the growth of industry, trade between nations is growing, the telegraph and then the telephone were invented, and so they're connecting the world in communications. And so a lot of people thought, oh wow, with all of this, everybody's getting richer, so we don't have reason to go to war. There's trade between nations, so that will reduce, the incentive to, or give people a motivation not to go to war. And now we're all connected by electronic communications, and so there will be this increase in understand. We'll all learn to understand each other. Everybody thought that the 20th century was going to be like a century of world peace. Maybe not everybody, but there was this general view that maybe we've seen an end to war. Maybe we're in a new era of world peace. And then, of course, the world wars come along and they completely shatter those illusions. The world wars were some of the most destructive, contests in memory. And not only had technology not led to an end to war, but also it had clearly made war all the more terrible and destructive. It was the world wars really showed that technology can just lead to more terrible weapons, more destructive weapons. If this lesson hadn't been learned by 1945, it was very strongly driven home by the atomic bomb, right? That was, I think, very strongly imprinted on the world consciousness, because here's the worst weapon that anybody has ever seen, and it's very clearly the product of modern science, technology, and industry. So. Even before World War II, you can see people, just from World War I, you can see people starting to question this whole progress thing. You can see it in the writings of certainly by the 1930s, historians and philosophers are talking about it. But after World War II, I think it was just, everybody was in complete shock, and the most optimistic people overall, especially the ones who were, who were the future is bright type of optimist, right? They were just really set back, and I think didn't know what to do or say about it. And so what seems to have happened is that a certain set of kind of reactionary voices that had always been around in the background sort of seized the moment and came to the fore and had a new, different take on what had happened. But their take was, this whole technology thing was a mistake, or at least some of them, said that, and so again we got this deep kind of distrust of technology and of industry, which I think was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? So again, we need a new, different way forward.
We look at the past and also the current and also in the future and try to find different metrics based on which we measure the progress, right? Do you have a favorite one, or what which one would you pick or choose for looking at the biggest progress in the last century maybe, and then also at some metrics that you might think would be useful for looking at the progress in this century and into the future as well?
Choosing metrics is very difficult, and I've had this conversation with people. Nobody has the perfect metric for progress. Economists like to use GDP or GDP per capita. There are lots of problems with that metric. It's a fine metric. It's one of the best ones we have, even though it's by no means perfect. I think you can look at things like energy consumption or per capita energy consumption. One of the most worrying trends actually is that in the US at least, per capita energy consumption flatlined starting in the 70s and just hasn't really been increasing, even though it was on a strong exponential curve for more than 100 years before that. So I think looking at there are some sort of key resource like production or consumption metrics that are good to look at, but no one metric is perfect. Nothing correlates perfectly with what we actually care about, which is human well-being. So I think we always have to look at multiple metrics, have them corroborate each other, and have them also corroborate our more qualitative sense of what's going on.
Oh, that's definitely a good point. How do you envision the future of Roots of Progress as your creation and your organization? What do you envision as the future for it to look like? How would you like it to grow, and what would be the ideal circumstances for it to grow?
Well, we're working on a few things right now. So I'm writing a book. The working title for the book is The Story of Industrial Civilization. Mm-hmm. It's going to tell the story of the great breakthroughs, the discoveries and inventions that made the modern industrial civilization and gave us our standard of living. And it's going to start to address this topic of the philosophy of progress. So finishing that book, getting it out there, hopefully that becomes a bestseller, I think will be a big part of what we're doing. We're also going to be doing a series of events and other programs to help build and strengthen the progress community. And we're just working on the strategic plan now, so stay tuned for announcements.
Awesome. If you could maybe pick one problem like external that you would like to solve, what would it be?
Certainly longevity would be a great thing to solve, because it kind of gives us time. It gives us all time to solve all the other problems. If we can all lengthen our lifespan, we not only have just a lot more time to enjoy this world, but also we have more time to solve everything else. So that is one I'd love to prioritize.
The important part is a lot of people don't realize, and we've been discussing this exactly with Christine before as well, that it's actually, at least in the few decades that are coming, it's almost impossible for the civilization to sustain itself without some form of longevity, or at least better healthcare addressing the problems that are plaguing people at the end of their lives, because the strain from the aging population that will be more and more for healthcare systems and pension systems and all of that. It's almost impossible for it to be somehow contained without some form of longevity technologies that will actually address the health span and also maybe lifespan as well. So definitely agree with that. You kind of addressed all that already. If you would be able to live longer life, are there some grandiose events or some milestones that you would like for yourself to be with, or experience, be it humans landing on Mars or connecting with other people, through BCIs or something like that? Are there any special things that you are rooting for?
Yeah, all of the above. No, I think one of the reasons that I would love to that I would love to live much longer than a typical human lifespan is for exactly that, just to see how history plays out, right? Especially when you've been like I do, I've been thinking about the grand sweep of human history over centuries and millennia, and I do think about where it goes. It's funny, I was just listening to a podcast with Tyler Cowen, the economist from George Mason, and he said something like, I'd be much I'd be much more like, I forget exactly how he said it. So, but it was something like, I'd be more okay with dying if just before I died, I got to read like the Wikipedia page that told me the rest of the future of the human race, and just to see how things played out, right? But I'd actually like to see it and experience it. So.
I think that's a thing, or like a characteristic trait maybe, that connects a lot of people here at the Foresight meeting and overall in the community. They're like deeply curious, about the future and what will happen, and they actually try and want to get there. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I would do cryonics for the same reason, right? Just to, even if I only woke up centuries from now, just to see, where that was and what had happened.
Yeah, deeply curious as well. Speaking on that, about that longer horizons, I guess, do you have some notion or like prediction maybe or something like that about what comes like post-capitalism, or how will that system change, or whether it will be UBI or something else? Do you have some sort of or idea how this economic progression will change? Because I think it seems like there are some problems within capitalism that will somehow need to be solved over time, and maybe somewhere some systems are already like working on that or trying to address it in different ways, right? So do you have a sense or idea which one, or like how will they converge, or what will actually be the next steps?
It's funny. I think the term capitalism is so ill-defined and is used to mean so many different things by different people that the term post-capitalism is like even more ill-defined. But I will say, I think a challenge of capitalism that maybe has not been yet solved very well is getting like a really clear philosophic definition of harm, and what does it mean for or what are the ways in which somebody's actions can harm somebody else? What counts as harm? How do we so like a basic principle of liberty is that your scope of liberty only extends to the extent that you don't harm others, right? Otherwise, obviously, that's where people's liberties bump up against each other. So, but I think there's I think there's a lot of disagreement about, well, what does it actually mean? I mean, obviously, if I physically assault someone, I've harmed them. But what if I outcompete them for a job? Did I harm you? What if my business makes your business obsolete? What if my technology makes your profession obsolete, right? What happens when containerization comes along in the shipping industry and the longshoremen are now out of work, right? Were they harmed by that, or is that just sort of the natural play of competition? I think this is a deep question that needs a philosophic answer, and I haven't yet, heard like a really robust answer that I think is certainly, and there's certainly not one that people generally agree on. And so I think that question leads to a lot of strife in society, because some people feel they've been harmed and their rights have been violated and they're due some sort of restitution, and other people disagree and they think it's just kind of the natural course of events, right? So.
I mean, that's true that particularly like with automation and AI, that will probably be a big topic in that sense, and who to attribute the blame to.
So I think a robust moral and political answer to that question that was well argued enough that it gained wide acceptance would do a lot towards having a less political strife.
Are there any presumptions about the future, let's say 20, 30 years, so midterm / long term, I guess, that you are somehow like counting with and operating based on that in the present, that others might not, some maybe like non-intuitive presumptions about the future that you are already like integrating into how we live right now?
I'm terrible at predictions, and I don't make a lot of them. I think it's more important to sort of know what the range of possible futures is. And so, like on that count, I would say, I think there's a wide range of possible futures, even, especially in the coming decades. I think on the one hand, we could see a continued acceleration or a re-acceleration of technological and material progress. We could see longevity and nanotech and better fission energy or even fusion energy. We could see a space renaissance. We could see all of these things, genetic engineering and so forth. Or we could see a continued deceleration of progress, and the future could actually look disturbingly very much like the present. And we might be looking back 30 years from now and saying, hey, where was that? Where did that mRNA technology go? Wasn't that supposed to create all sorts of great things for us? Whatever happened with that? The same way that today we look back on like nuclear power and we're like, wasn't nuclear power supposed to be giving like all of our electricity by now? And whatever happened with that? So one thing I would like is for people to be aware of these possibilities so that we're not saying whatever happened to that thing, in 30 or 50 years from now, right? The promising technologies should be everywhere, not only in people's memories.
Maybe you touched on one thing that now sparked in my mind, and there are there are some people who are now looking at the progress and thinking that degrowth might be the better option to go that way. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think degrowth is a defeatist attitude. Yeah. It is essentially saying there's no way to continue making our lives better without leading to some sort of disaster. And you can get down to I don't believe that as a factual proposition, but if you get down to it, if we did believe that was true. To me, that would be like red alert, all hands on deck. Let's solve the scientific and technological problems that are making that a reality. I wrote an article for the MIT Technology Review a little while ago where I made a historical analogy to William Crookes, who sounded the alarm in 1898 about how the world was running out of fertilizer. And he was absolutely correct. We were running out of we were quickly going to hit a wall and run out of the world's known supplies of natural fertilizer. But Crookes wasn't a degrowther. He didn't say, hey, let's like scale back and reduce agriculture. He said, let's find a technological solution. He called on the chemists of the world to find a way to make synthetic fertilizer, and that's exactly what happened. We got the Haber-Bosch process, and that continued to feed the world. So I think if we were running up against some sort of imminent resource limits, the thing to do would be to put a red alert out to all of the scientists and engineers of the world and say, let's solve this problem, not to commit to degrowth. Degrowth is like the worst possible thing that could happen, other than absolutely hitting the wall and just having a crisis. I think anytime you ever feel like you have to do something like degrowth, it should be considered at best like a last resort, temporary retreat until we can just like regroup and solve the problem. But we should always be setting our sights, high on an ambitious future by growing our living standards, and I think continuing to grow the population as well, long term, because more people is how we get more innovation and more ideas.
Yeah, that's one of the problems that some people, even like when people are discussing longevity, they say overpopulation. But in reality, like by the end of this century, the population will probably be already like dying off in a sense, because fertility is dropping. The age range is also moving quite a bit. So there are some problems that seem counterintuitive, but it might be very well the case that in a few decades we actually have the opposite problem from overpopulation. So yeah. Okay, so as we're nearing towards the end, I have a few quick, wish list question, let's say. So if you could bring one technology to fruition with a snap of your fingers, what would it be? You kind of mentioned that longevity.
Yeah, I already said longevity. If it weren't for that, or aside from that, some sort of abundant energy, abundant cheap energy, right? Fusion, or something like that, because energy is just such a fundamental technology that enables everything else. Yeah.
So now the second one, which is more, theoretical. If you imagine that we all have suddenly Neuralinks, we are somewhere there in the future, and you can transmit one idea or a mental model or something like that to everybody in the world and share it with them, what would it be?
I would say to everybody, there's a popular idea out there. People say, you should know where your food comes from. Well, I think people should really know where their food comes from, which and not just their food, but their entire standard of living, right? People should look around at industrial civilization with a little bit of awe and wonder and gratitude, understanding that we are the lucky, people in all of human history who get to enjoy this standard of living. And I think people should go out and just learn a little bit about where did this come from and what does it take to keep it going. I call this concept industrial literacy. It's a basic familiarity with the technologies and the processes that keep the world going and that allow us to enjoy, air conditioning and hot running water and sanitation and fresh milk and eggs and juice in the refrigerator and all of the things that are just part of modern life. I'd like people to get more curious about that.
Yeah. There's this other question. What if you had the Neuralink still? Would there be a different question that you would ask people if you would want for them to if you would want them to consider some question really deeply, I guess apart from that, but more in a personal way, how to move them forward in their own life? Do you have a sense are there questions that you often ask yourself that seem really important or powerful for you?
One thing I've been thinking about, and I don't have an answer to yet, is the relationship of progress and safety. Technology can eliminate many risks and dangers from our lives, but it also creates new ones, right? And so a significant amount of technology actually is devoted to sort of solving the problems of previous technological development or industrial developments, which is sometimes taken as evidence that something's going wrong. Again, going back to the David Deutsch point of view, that's not something going wrong. It's just the natural course of things. Progress always creates new problems, and then we solve them with more progress. But there is, I think, an open question about what is the best way to get both progress and safety, because both of those are values, and we should have both. More and a higher degree of safety is actually part of progress, but again, progress creates new risks. So what is the best way to sort of, I hesitate to say balance, I hate balance, but what is the best way to integrate those two and to get the best of both? I don't have the full answer yet.
And there's a lot of people trying to at least think about that question, particularly within the AI community and so on. So definitely a good one. Yeah. So the last question is that I like to ask people, since I care about a better future. So how would your vision, or let's say utopian or rather protopian, that's somewhere in the future, how would it look? Do you have a specific vision that can you describe it? What would be part of that better future, the vision? What kind of maybe technologies are there, or how does the world look like? Something like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've already touched on a number of things, right? I think expanding out from this planet eventually and settling other worlds. The longevity technology to allow everyone to have as many years of health and vitality as they choose, and ultimately automating away, so much of the so much of work and jobs that people don't want to do. That eventually, all of us just become poets and philosophers because we're spending our time in these, in these kind of intellectual and creative pursuits that we find very engaging and fulfilling.
That's a good picture. All right, thanks for taking the time to talk with me, and maybe share with where can people find you, and Roots of Progress. What's the
That's right. Yeah. Find the Roots of Progress online at rootsofprogress.org. I'm also pretty active on Twitter. My handle is Jason Crawford.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Been a good conversation.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Jason Crawford. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find the links to Roots of Progress and Jason's personal website with his newsletter in the description, and I recommend checking all of it out. I would also greatly appreciate if you could help to spread this positive message further by liking this video, sharing with friends, and subscribing for more episodes. And if you know about people that radiate positive and optimistic energy and are focused on solutions and building a better future, please mention them in the comments or in the linked Facebook group, and I'll be glad to interview them next. I look forward to reading your comments and suggestions, and as a parting word, let me remind you that it is in our hands to build a better future. So let's each do the best we can, step by step, because if we don't, it might not happen at all. All right, see you in the next one.